Creepy Craigslist Roommate by Mac1187.
When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. And so far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout the dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with thanks. I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me in to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. And I wondered, what the hell could she possibly be doing? Occasionally, she would come out to talk to me for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words. So I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Oh, hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker. Max Barker. Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name, well, it really freaked me out. And, well, it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of the room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy topic for me, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back and listened to her. 10 minutes into the story and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower her volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." This was a big game changer. Now suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. Now after a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle again. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettling feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look on her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go back to bed. I could hear her walking back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, I went out into the hallway and my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit the guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. After a month later, I moved out. And then she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out of the movie theater, I turned my phone on. And to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? That shit freaks me out.
Roommate from Hell by Revo XIII13. English is not my first language, so expect any language errors. So, a few years ago, I was studying at my university in a major city. Now, I lived in a small town that was more than 70 kilometers away from it, so as you can imagine, I had to rent a room. I found one though, in a 4-story building. Most of it was rented by various students. The flat I was supposed to live in looked like the following. Behind the front door, there was a 5 or 6 meter long corridor that was very narrow. On my right were 2 more doors. Behind the first one was a room where my roommate was supposed to live in. Then there was a kitchen. So it was practically a combined bathroom, which wasn't really hygienic to be honest, and the building was pretty old. On the end of the corridor, there was a big room that I was going to live in. For a year or so, I found this place really great. My roommate was a female student that was rather nice. She even cooked things occasionally. That was a really life-saving thing considering the fact that if I were to do this, I could probably turn water black. But then she got pregnant with her boyfriend and had to say goodbye to studying. Here enters my second roommate. In fact, even after living with him for nearly half a year and all that happened, I still don't remember his name really. Anyway, I should tell you about the relationship. He was a 22 to 20-year-old student, whose face I don't even remember too. I saw him twice maybe, for he was always working and studying while I was in the flat, or vice versa. So time passes, and we are ignoring each other. Everything is rather fine. Then, things start to happen. The first warning was a call from my landlord. He is a tad bit ugly and an old man. Especially his teeth though. He either has dark yellow teeth or none at all. But I can't say anything wrong about him as a landlord. Once I accidentally paid him too much and he very quickly returned the surplus, so yeah, he was an honest guy. He had several flats in the city that he was renting to the students. So he said to me that he would like me to watch over my roommates to see if something is wrong with him. Something happened in his workplace. I think he hit someone when he was talking gibberish about that when he met the landlord about money. So later that day, I returned to the flat, and what did I see? A kitchen cupboard is broken. It looked like an elephant had sat on it, and the remains were spread all over the room. My roommate is going in circles, looking like he's trying to clean the place, I asked him what happened and he answered something about a party ended up going wrong. So right now, I should probably say that I haven't left this place straight away. I am kind of a sheltered kid, living in a small town in a not so big place and in a rather peaceful European country, and I am a student, and in all my life I haven't even seen marijuana. I never witnessed any crime. For me, it was just saying, well, he acts strange, but maybe he just had a bad day. So I decided just to go to bed, or rather to the mattress that I slept on. It wasn't easy to get to sleep, because he was constantly there making sounds in the kitchen. I even went there to ask him and he would be silent. He was so surprised by me speaking that he literally jumped. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, okay," and then it was a tad bit less noisy. But the fact remained that the kitchen was still a mess, even though that he was in there the entire time. Now this should have been a second warning to me, but once again I didn't connect any dots. I only decided that it would be best to barricade myself in just in case he tried anything. Also, he had his right foot in a bucket. No idea why. Eventually I decided just to brush this off as nothing and started to go back to sleep. However, I was brutally awoken at 4 AM by the sound of him screaming and telling me that I have to open the door right now. His voice was really angry, but not scared. I loudly refused him. Then, he opened the door by kicking it. He kicked the table which had a computer on it, and it got pushed back by the impact. The big part of the jam broke off too, and he entered my room and started screaming something completely incoherent, saying that I was planning on him. He didn't even attack me though, he just screamed at me. He also broke a ceiling lamp and other stuff next to my computer. I was on the verge of a panic attack. I sent a text to my father, who was regrettably more than 70 kilometers from me, about what was happening. He tried to call the police, but for some dumb reason in this country, they can only act if it's a direct witness or victim calling them, so there was no help from them. I mean, seriously. The next half an hour was strange. My roommate kept on screaming things incoherent and continued to demolish the flat. I was still on my mattress and able to leave because he was blocking the only way out. He then nearly assaulted me because when he saw my gloves, as he decided, proved that I was a hitman, as I wouldn't leave any fingerprints if I wanted to kill him while wearing them. He was maybe half a meter from me, charging at me, when he suddenly decided to jump back, screaming that he won't let me kill him that way. This routine was played out several times. Several times he entered my room to scream something incoherent, only to quickly leave again. In the end, I managed to push him out by persuading him that if I left the house without taking the keys, he would be safe. You can imagine how I felt moving through that corridor, unlocking the door, with him being in the kitchen behind me, which was full of knives. In the end, I did manage to flee, however, wearing only my pajamas with my phone in hand. I took refuge in another apartment in the same building, in which a relative of the landlord was staying with 2 other people. I knew him because once the landlord couldn't collect the rent in person and asked me to give the money to him. They were kind enough to actually make me tea. I stayed there until the police come and they returned to the room. The roommate then opened the door and I was able to pack everything that was valuable. He was in the kitchen and the policemen tried to interrogate him, but that was rather unsuccessful. He wasn't really responding to anything. He just looked like the attack was over. They told him that he needed to go for a walk to cool his head. I then left the flat and I waited an hour in a safe distance from this place. My father then picked me up and we drove back to my town. A few hours later I did get a call from the landlord. After he entered the flat and come in there, apparently the guy was still there, once again having some kind of mental breakdown. The landlord decided to call the cops again, and this guy barricaded himself to the balcony, threatening to throw stuff off if people didn't leave him alone. This is when the police come in and literally dragged him out of the building. Now the thing is, I still don't know what happened to him after that. Even after the incident, I heard two different versions of what was wrong with him. The first was that apparently he had some kind of insanity that made him very paranoid, or maybe had schizophrenia. I mean, he was literally ripping cables off the walls because the government apparently wired it. The second was that he somehow took some really weird drugs and massively overdid it. And the police searched throughout my room. They didn't find anything. My First Roommate by Keylog26.
When I was accepted into a college that was far from my hometown, I didn't really know anyone else who lived there. The college I went to didn't have dorms, but they did have apartments that they suggested students to live in due to the proximity of the college. And I'm sure they got a lot of kickback for people who signed up and said they heard about the apartment complex through the college. I was pretty broke at that point. Plus, I wanted to meet some new people right away. So I chose my apartment largely due to a roommate matching service they had. Basically, you fill out the questionnaire about your demographics and hobbies/interests, and the service would match you with roommates that were compatible with you. Now, mind you, I chose this particular apartment despite the 1-star reviews I saw across the board online. I mean, they were under new management, and it was only a year lease. It couldn't be that bad. I was matched with another guy in a 2-bedroom and 2-bath apartment. I was so excited to move in and meet him. I moved in a few days after the lease started, probably about 3 weeks before school started, and already began regretting my decision. The apartment was nasty and smelled like mold and old cigarettes. In fact, there was a used ashtray on the coffee table when I first got there. Now, when they said it was furnished, I didn't expect it to be exactly like home. My new roommate didn't show up for about a week. When he did finally show up, I found out that he was about 35 years old and didn't even go to my school. He was pretty scruffy and smelled like old cigarettes and BO. Eventually, I found out that he used to be homeless and he would take out student loans to afford the application fee and the first few months' rent, but he never enrolled in classes. After the first few months, he stopped paying rent, and it took about 6 months for the property to finally evict him. Now, in the state that I live in, you can only be evicted through the court system, and this was such a bogged down situation, and so it had taken a little while. While he lived in my apartment, he never changed clothes. He always wore the same beat-up looking camo pants and stained dirty wife beater. I even offered him some clothes I was getting rid of. They would have fit him perfectly. He was content though, so whatever. He would also have a lot of his old roommates from when he lived at a homeless shelter over. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to come home to a random person doing laundry, even when my roommate wasn't home. When I would have a guy over to hang out in my room, I'm gay. He would watch us from the front door to my room through a crack in his door just wide enough for me to see the creepiest look on his face. Literally every time. Needless to say, he gave me the creeps. Now, a few months after school started, and after I was noticing his creepy behavior more and more, I was in my room asleep with a guy I was talking to at the time, actually still my boyfriend today, when I hear a knock on my bedroom door. I look at the clock and it's about 3 o'clock in the morning. I get up to go see what whoever it was wanted, and open my door to a random, dirty, old, naked guy. He says he's friends with my roommate and thought my roommate was in my room with me. I had a total flip out. Obviously, my roommate isn't in my room with me. in order to get into my apartment, my roommate would have had to let him in. And the apartment isn't very big, so it wasn't like my roommate could have gone somewhere else and that his friend wouldn't know where he was. He was either in the living room or in his room. I throw this dude out, him being butt-ass naked, and let myself into my roommate's room. This is the first time I've ever been in there, mainly because I have no reason to associate with him. He's sitting in his corner doing absolutely nothing with his lights off, almost as if he was waiting for me to come in there. I ask him about everything that just happened and he tries to play dumb like he didn't even know the guy. Someone had to let him in, and it wasn't me. I decided to drop it because the eviction notice started piling up on his door. I figured it's just a matter of time until he's gone. Well, in the meantime, I see the naked dude randomly in the apartment doing laundry a handful of times when I wouldn't get home from class. Finally, my roommate is evicted, and I think I'm done with that. And maybe we'll get another roommate that is actually my age or cool. A few weeks go by that are more or less quiet. Then one day, I hear a knock at the front door during the day. When I answer it, I see the random naked dude standing there, thankfully clothed this time, with a trash bag full of what looked like disgusting laundry. He tells me that my roommate said that it was cool if he come in to use the washer, and starts to walk forward like he owns the place. I step in front of him and tell him that his friend doesn't live here anymore, and no, he can't use my washing machine. So I close the door and I lock it and I go back to my room. About 20 minutes later, I keep hearing a random noise from the balcony. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I figured it was just a squirrel or a bird out there scratching around. I keep on hearing the noise, so I decided to investigate, and I see the homeless guy trying his best to climb up my balcony. I told him I was calling the cops, but obviously, by the time they get here, he's gone. That same day, I went to the property manager and asked what kind of roommate matching service works like that, and I also demanded that I get out of my lease. After some heated discussion, I persuaded her that it was probably in her best interest just to let me leave. I found a nice 1-bedroom apartment, and I never looked back.
My old friend and roommate was a real sick guy, by Roy G. Pavon 99I. I was a bit of a stoner a few years ago, and my girlfriend had recently broken up with me, and all I wanted to do was self-medicate and forget her. Me and my cousin were out looking for weed one night, and that's how we met Joey. Joey was 4 years older than both of us, and he dressed like he was a typical kid who wanted to be ghetto or gangster looking. He stood 6'5" and weighed 240 pounds. He was a massive hulk of a guy. His personality at the time seemed like that of somebody who was funny and kind nevertheless, so we both let it slide. He was a hardcore stoner and collected numerous exotic pets like snakes and such. Although something was off about the way that he would match his do-rag to his sneakers and t-shirt and pants, that was a bit funny. There's not many gangs in my area, but I would imagine in all of his red or yellow outfits he would attract someone wanted attention. Now, if Joey was anything, he was a storyteller. He had a story about everything, and it was usually a direct or indirect way to brag about himself. He was definitely loud and a motor mouth, and I usually just ignored him when he annoyed me or I went home. Now, my cousin had moved back to work, so I stayed behind. This meant that me and Joey quickly become pretty good friends. To be fair, I had no one else besides Joey and his roommates. So fast forward a few months. It appears that Joey is somewhat of a ladies' man. There's always an influx of women who pass through. Oddly enough, they were all usually single mothers or way older than him. Now, looking back on this in retrospect, I would definitely say it was part of his mental illness, the way that he would portray himself to desperate women. Now, Joey moves away for a few months but then comes back home. He then gets a new girlfriend, Tara, in the same week that he moved back. Tara is pretty normal and a college student and definitely not his usual overweight single mum type. Now, one thing that I learnt about Joey is that he always portrayed himself as some kind of knight in shining armour to women and somewhat of a feminist, writing them poetry and such. But it was what happened over the next 2 years that revealed the dark side of Joey. I never thought that he had one, and I'm glad to be free from it. It was absolutely terrifying, and while I try and beat myself up now for sticking around with him, I've had so many abusive relationships, and as a victim, I grew up so used to it, unfortunately, that I wouldn't normally do a lot. I blame myself for a lot of what transpired. Anyway, to continue with the story, I moved in with them and another couple. I felt like, why not move in with my best friend? He's a bit annoying sometimes, but everybody has their faults, right? Now, it was almost as if somebody had switched something on Joey's very core. He'd become very angry and explosive about the slightest of things going wrong, always threatening to violently attack other people and bad-mouthing me to his girlfriend and other roommates. One night I accidentally knocked his weed off his dresser onto the floor, and to my surprise he slaps me for it. I'm shocked and I move out for a few weeks after that. I decide I'm never going back with that guy again. Then Joey slowly tries to get back on my good side again and keeps saying how he was abused by his ex-girlfriend when he moved away, and that the other roommate stole from his girlfriend, Tara, so he was just in a violent mood after everything went wrong. Being the naive, forgiving person that I am, I accept this, and for the next few months we hang out and he's generally okay in small doses. However, a few months later, I had to move out of my apartment as I was flat broke, so Joey offers again to give me a place to stay until I get back on my feet. I having nowhere else to go except this, and they move all things for me. Now, it's only been a few weeks and Joey is worse than he's ever been before. He beats his girlfriend's dog brutally. The police are called, but since the dog is a typical dumb, loving lug type, he runs to Joey all happy and playful. The police don't believe it, so they just leave. Joey begins to hoard cats, and he has almost a dozen. He used to hoard reptiles in the same way, and he neglects them and lets them die. He's fairly neglectful and abuses all of his cats as well. He never gives them clean water, just leaves them toilet water up, and hardly changes their litter box. The smell becomes unbearable, and Joey starts to break and throw things around the house. I usually lock myself in the room and let it unfold, scared to death, with 911 dialed on my cell phone. One day, he pushes his girlfriend down to the floor. They make up, so I feel like if I call the police they won't believe me. He starts verbally abusing her about her college, about sleeping with guys before they met, and that one of the guys was black. Joey becomes openly racist and calls them black people, and he sees them on the street and says other really racist and nasty things to them. I'm honestly surprised that he's never got beaten up for it. They eventually break up a few weeks later, and I plan on getting the hell out of there, as well as secretly not wanting to deal with his crap anymore. He then explodes one night, and I finally have the balls to say, if you lay one finger on me, I'm calling the police, leave me alone. He then goes back to being romantic, trying to win his girlfriend back, but she's not having any of it. He eventually explodes and calls her some really bad profanities. He dates a few different girls, but they find out what he's like and that he's just using them for money for weed. He puts a lot of really weird, desperate Facebook statuses up and goes back to writing his poems. His poems are all pretty much I loved you, and then that he wants to die. Eventually I do find a new place, and in the weeks before, I learned something that's really disturbing about Joey. So one night, Joey isn't anywhere to be found. Good, I thought. I then get a phone call a few days later at about 6 in the morning, Apparently, Joey had exposed himself to a 15-year-old girl even though he was nearing 30, and sent him pictures of his penis. Her parents had then called the police on him. I pretended that I cared and hung up, then I also called the police on him as well. A day or so later, he comes back and explains that he's going to start moving out. He tells me this isn't the first time that this has happened, and he likes to take out young girls to go and get ice cream and things. Sometimes he would point out at little girls and say they were attractive, but I just thought he had a sick sense of humour. I have since blocked his phone number and social media and tell him I'm moving to a fake street address so that way he doesn't bother me. It's been a month or so and I haven't heard back from him. I'm just hoping the police charge him with what he's done. Roommate wanted, female only, by Scars and Stripes. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out from her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together yet since they'd only been dating for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online, browsing Craigslist. She then found an ad titled something like Roommate Wanted, Females Only. Now this sort of thing was pretty common though, since the area that she was looking in was mostly searching for young professionals. The listing itself was for a room in a house that was about $225 a month. This is quite cheap compared to most places on there. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda then sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes, she then received an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl said that she worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at about 8. Eventually the time comes when Amanda had to arrive, and she did at 8. When she gets there is a handwritten note on the floor saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice but slightly unkept. There's tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc., and still no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door, an older man opens the door. At first, Amanda thought that she had actually went to the wrong house or something, being why the old man was there. After though, the guy then reassures her that the occupant was actually out and he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pretty pleasant and offered to show her around. Now, alarms still hadn't started going off yet, but some red flags were. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looks like he lived out of his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on, and they walked around the house. It's at this moment that Amanda notices a huge red flag. There's no furniture, nothing. The landlord was polite and answering the questions but seemed irritated to be keeping the lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they are walking down the hallway into the living room, she notices that the front door has a plank nailed across it. Broken. Yeah, whatever. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding and she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave the guy trying to be polite. As she's giving the guy her thanks for showing, he begins to perk up a bit and states that he forgot to show her the basement. It's recently furnished and would be a great room, etc., and he's really wanting to go and show Amanda down there. Now at the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. Now in this little hallway is a basement door, just ahead of them. When he tries to open the door, it opens outwards to create somewhat of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is literally pitch black. He smiles. motions down the stairs and says, "Ladies first." Now what happens next is no more than just a really good stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers the phone. "Hey, yeah, are you there? I'll come out back to go and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With a true sense of confidence in her voice, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. The landlord then just looks back at her like he's really confused or something. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped out of there like hell. When Amanda got home, she told her mother and my brother everything. The cops were called and they took her statements, and they went in to investigate, and the ad had since been removed. I later found out that the property had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier, and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room that the landlord didn't want her to look inside was actually where he had been staying. There was piles of old dirty blankets, rotten food, empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepy was that he had loads of plastered and ripped up pages of porno mags on the walls and everywhere in the room. The really scary part was in the basement, however. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty except some more piles of blankets and a small wooden box that had duct tape and other weird stuff like that inside it. It's fair to say that Amanda decided that she wasn't going to move in. Hello everyone, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video then please give it a like and subscribe for my future content. I wanted to say a massive thank you to my good friend yeahmanT.V, who you can hear featured on this video. Make sure you go and check out his channel and his content and subscribe to him. He's a really nice guy, so I wanted to say thank you again to him for featuring. Thank you. Thank you for watching everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm definitely enjoying more Pacific stories like with this one, and I know that a lot of you guys do, so I'm going to keep doing them. If you want to keep up to date with me, it's best that you probably check out my Twitter, because that's the place that I am most active on social media. So thank you for watching again. I'm going to try and go and get well now. Take care everyone, I hope you have a nice day.